Whoever came up with the phrase family is everything clearly never grew up in a house where love had conditions. I was mid-meeting with a French client in our Paris office, reviewing a high-profile rebranding campaign when the email landed in my inbox. It was from my mother, or more precisely, from the Carter Family Heritage Gala Committee, with her name proudly signed at the bottom. The subject line read, "Celebrating 50 years of tradition, a night with the Carters." Attached was an elegant digital invitation in navy and gold, complete with RSVP link, event schedule, and a photo of my parents, Robert and Linda Carter, smiling beneath a crystal chandelier. My younger brother Ethan and his wife Claire stood beside them, looking like a Hallmark couple. Perfect, framed, centered. I wasn't in the photo, but that didn't surprise me anymore. I almost closed the tab, but something made me scroll down. Right under the RSVP button, a short personal note was tucked in italics. "Hope your mysterious CEO fiancé can join this time. Looking forward to finally meeting him. Love, Mom." I stared at the screen. A beat passed, then another. Then I laughed. Not a ha-ha kind of laugh, but the sort that starts in your chest and cracks somewhere on its way up. Because that one little line? It wasn't just passive-aggressive. It was classic Linda Carter. Refined sarcasm dressed as motherly affection. They never believed Julian was real. Not really. They thought I'd invented him, like a glamorous boyfriend in a teenage diary. A man who was too busy to visit, always traveling, working overseas. In truth, Julian Blake was realer than anyone in that photo, in every way that mattered. He just never needed to show up, until maybe now. I hadn't been back to California in almost 3 years. The last time was when Claire had her baby shower and I flew in for a weekend only to be seated at the back of the restaurant, behind the cousins and the caterers, while Ethan gave a toast about real family values without even glancing at me. I didn't complain. I never really did. That was my role in the Carter family, the creative one, the free spirit, the still figuring things out at 33. Never mind that I ran my own agency in Europe or had just signed a deal with a luxury brand that would triple our revenue in Q4. I was just tired. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. The sun had started to dip outside my window, casting a golden glow across the Seine. I could hear the low hum of Julian on a call in the next room, his voice calm, deliberate, British tinged from his childhood years in London. I picked up my phone and texted him, "Me. Got an invite to the family gala. Apparently you're imaginary." "Julian, finally. My secret's out." "Me, should we go shock them?" "Julian, can I wear something dramatic?" I smiled. He never asked if I wanted to go, only how we'd go. That was the difference between Julian and everyone else. He never doubted me, never needed explanations. He just showed up in the quietest, most powerful ways. And now, maybe it was time for him to show up somewhere they couldn't ignore. By the time the RSVP clicked, yes plus one, I'd already started mentally packing my suitcase, not because I owed them an appearance, but because I was done shrinking myself to make them comfortable. This time, I wouldn't walk in alone, and this time, they'd remember. There are phone calls you take out of obligation, and then there are the ones you avoid because you already know exactly how they'll end. "Are you still in that little studio in Paris?" "It's a 3-bedroom flat, Mom. I've told you that before." "Well, you always move around so much. It's hard to keep track." It wasn't a conversation. It was an assessment. I learned early on that nothing I did could quite check the right boxes. Not the Ivy League program I dropped out of after landing a job in Berlin. Not the boutique agency I launched on my own. Not even the 6-figure contracts I'd negotiated by 28. None of it mattered. Because I hadn't become a doctor. Because I wasn't married by 30. Because I lived a 12-hour flight away and didn't post family brunches on Facebook. Ethan, on the other hand, was their crown jewel. Harvard, cardiology, wife, house baby. He was a checklist come to life. The safe bet. The embodiment of everything my parents could show off at dinner parties. I remember the first time I brought up Julian. It was a casual mention, something like, "Julian just signed a major account in Singapore, so we're taking a few days in Bali afterward." My mom didn't even blink. "Julian who?" "My partner, the one I've mentioned for over a year." "Oh, that Julian, the one we've never met. Must be nice to have that kind of vacation time. Ethan can't even take off a full weekend. I could feel the slap in her voice, even across continents. To her, my relationship didn't count because it wasn't presented. It wasn't real unless it was validated by them in person, under scrutiny, with approval. But the thing is, Julian and I never needed their validation. We'd met at a design symposium in Madrid, two people in the back row exchanging glances over a panel that misquoted Dieter Rams. He approached me during the coffee break, and we ended up skipping the afternoon sessions entirely to walk the city and argue about typography and brand ethics. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. But he saw me. He saw the part of me I never showed at home, the side that wasn't constantly trying to prove something or shrink herself to fit someone else's idea of success. Still, there were moments when the weight of my family's silence felt heavier than outright rejection. They never asked for photos of Julian, never asked what made me happy, what drove me. They assumed, like always, that I was drifting. The last Christmas the first spent in San Jose, my father asked me, mid-lunch in front of everyone. So, are you still doing freelancing? I run a full-scale branding consultancy, Dad. We just signed Dior's wellness subsidiary. Well, I suppose that's a form of stability. For now. Claire reached over and refilled my water glass like I might need it. I did. No one spoke of Julian. Not once. Not when I mentioned our apartment, or our travels, or the conferences we'd spoken at together. They just smiled and nodded, like I was humoring myself with a long, elaborate fantasy. It wasn't that they hated me. It was worse. They pitied me. And that kind of dismissal doesn't scream, it whispers quietly in every pause between topics. It echoes in every family group chat I was accidentally left out of, in every birthday text sent 12 hours late, in every cousin's wedding where my name was misspelled on the place card, if it appeared at all. But this time, this gala was different. It wasn't about finally being included. It was about standing in a room full of people who had spent a decade overlooking me, and letting them realize too late that I had never needed a seat at their table. I had built my own. Julian booked our flights that night. Business class, one way. He knew I might not want to stay long. When I told him what the invitation said, he smiled. Maybe you should introduce me as your imaginary plus one. Give them a show. I'm not looking to prove anything, I said. I know, he said, but you don't have to hide either. The distance between Paris and San Francisco is roughly 5,600 miles, but the distance between the version of me they remember and the woman I've become, that's not something you can measure in miles. And soon, they'd see for themselves. There's a strange feeling that settles in your stomach when you step into a room full of people who have already decided who you are. It's not fear. It's not even anxiety. It's more like resignation. The gala was held at the Street James Heritage Ballroom in downtown San Francisco, a glass and marble monstrosity designed for opulence. The kind of place where valet attendants wore earpieces and the coat check looked like a boutique. I arrived alone. My dress was floor-length, deep emerald silk, tailored in Paris. My hair swept into a low bun, gold cuff earrings glinting under the chandelier lights. I looked like I belonged there. But the second I walked in, I could feel it. The polite freeze in the air. The half-second too long glances. The curiosity not out of admiration, but out of suspicion. I could hear it in the murmurs behind champagne flutes and in the way my mother's eyes swept me up and down, not to compliment, but to assess. Ava! You made it, she said, her smile a shade too wide. And, you came solo? I returned the smile, cool and unfazed. Julian's flight landed late. He'll join soon. That was all I said. I didn't owe more. The ballroom was already buzzing. I recognized maybe half of them, most from childhood Christmas parties or graduation ceremonies where I was never asked what I was studying, only whether I was still abroad. My father was across the room, speaking to a cluster of old colleagues from the university board. When he caught sight of me, his face twitched into a restrained nod, the kind you give a guest speaker at an event, not your daughter. Ethan and Claire arrived shortly after me. Claire wore a soft blush satin dress and a necklace that probably had a story about being passed down 3 generations. She walked with ease, like the room belonged to her. Ethan kissed my cheek and asked about Paris like he was reading off a script. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year. Mom said Julian's not coming, he asked between sips of wine. He's coming, I said simply. Right. Can't wait to finally meet him. There it was again, the tone, the edge. Dinner was scheduled for 7:30, but guests were already settling into their seats. I glanced at the seating chart. My name was at table 8. Claire and Ethan were at table 2 with my parents. No surprise there. Table 8 had a few cousins, a second-tier donor couple, and a family friend whose name I couldn't recall. The spare seat beside mine had no name card, just a folded tag that read guest of Miss Ava Carter. I could almost hear them thinking, if he even shows up. Throughout the cocktail hour, the questions came in waves, all veiled behind smiles. So, Ava, still doing that online design thing? Do you two live in the same time zone? I'd learned long ago that when someone wants to make you feel small, the most disarming thing you can do is not shrink. Near the bar, one overheard my mother speaking to Aunt Judith and a few of the elder board wives. I wasn't eavesdropping, they simply weren't careful. She says he's in branding, Mom laughed softly. Which I guess is like advertising but vaguer. And still no photo? Judith asked. Oh, I stopped asking. At this point, I think he's a myth. Or a catfish. They all laughed. If he's real, she added, we'll know soon enough. I felt a slow burn rise beneath my skin. My hand tightened around the stem of my champagne glass. But I didn't move. I just stood there, tall and still, like stone. They wanted a reaction. They weren't going to get one. Dinner was called. The lights dimmed slightly as people began making their way to their assigned tables. I walked alone, my heels echoing softly against the marble floor. At table 8, I sat, back straight, smile faint, waiting. The program began. There were welcome remarks, recognition speeches, a short film montage of the Carter family legacy narrated by a local news anchor. My parents were thanked for their lifelong contributions. Ethan was called a symbol of generational excellence. No mention of me. Of course not. The MC announced a short intermission before the keynote speaker. That was the cue. I glanced at the ballroom doors. Julian stepped into the ballroom like he'd walked into dozens before, unhurried, deliberate, and slightly underdressed in a way that made everyone else seem like they were trying too hard. He wore a midnight blue suit with a soft matte finish, tailored to perfection, no tie. Just an open, collared white shirt and a small pin on his lapel, his company's discreet logo, which only industry insiders would recognize. His hair, slightly windblown from the rush over, caught the light just enough to shimmer. He was composed, effortlessly, and somehow, just by standing there, he made the entire room tilt. My mother turned first, mid-conversation, her wine glass pausing halfway to her lips. Her mouth opened, not enough for a word, just enough for disbelief. Across the table, Ethan straightened his back. Aunt Judith whispered something that made the other women stiffen, and Claire, to her credit, smiled. Julian didn't look around like he was searching. He knew where I'd be. His eyes found mine in seconds. He smiled. Not performative, not dramatic, just real. He made his way through the rows of tables, nodding politely at guests who instinctively moved aside as he passed, though none of them recognized him, not yet. His presence created that rare hush, like when a storm is about to break but no one wants to admit they feel it in their bones. When he reached my table, he bent down, kissed me gently on the cheek, and whispered, "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder." I laughed, audibly. The first genuine sound I'd made all evening. Then he took the empty seat beside me, the one they all thought would stay empty. From the moment Julian sat down, the attention shifted. Table 2, where my parents and Ethan sat, went unusually quiet. Forks paused midair. Wine glasses hovered. I could feel the recalibration begin. You know the moment when people who thought they had the full picture suddenly realized they were staring at the wrong painting the whole time. Introductions began organically. A cousin I barely spoke to leaned over. "So, Julian, what is it you do again?" He answered easily. "I run a branding consultancy, global projects mostly. Next up, North America." That last part was deliberate. I knew it. They did too. Across the room, I caught my mother watching, her lips pressed thin, her fingers tapping the linen napkin in her lap. The MC returned to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we continue our celebration of heritage, legacy, and innovation, it's my honor to welcome our keynote speaker and this year's gala lead sponsor. A pause. Julian Blake, CEO of Blake Strategies International. The name hit the room like a dropped glass. Heads turned, chairs shifted. My father actually blinked twice. My mother inhaled sharply, her lips parting as if to say something, but nothing came out. Julian stood, adjusted his jacket, and offered me the slightest glance. I gave a small nod. He walked toward the stage with the same quiet grace he always carried, as if none of this surprised him. Because it didn't. Not really. This wasn't for show. This was him showing up. He didn't give a long speech, just 5 minutes. Legacy is a complicated word. We inherit it, but we also build it. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is walk into a room that forgot us. Not with anger, but with clarity. Tonight, I'm not just a sponsor. I'm a partner to someone who understands that legacy isn't about where you come from, it's about what you choose to carry forward. He glanced at me again when he said that. The room clapped. Polite at first, then stronger. My mother's hands remained in her lap. My father was the first from table 2 to rise and clap. I saw it in his jaw, the tight shift, the recognition. Not approval, exactly. What conferences he'd spoken at, whether he ever did mentorships or if his firm took interns. They didn't even pretend not to be curious. Later, during dessert, Claire leaned over and smiled at me. You looked taller when you walked in. I smiled back. I didn't change. The room did. After the final toast, the event shifted into mingling and slow jazz. I stepped away to the balcony for some air. San Francisco lights glittered like distant stars, the city humming with the kind of quiet only found above the noise. A minute later, my mother joined me. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood beside me, arms crossed, looking out. You never said he was. That Julian Blake. Would it have mattered? A long pause. We just didn't know. You never asked. She looked down, then slowly looked at me. You looked strong tonight. I've always been strong, Mom. You just never saw it. She didn't respond. But she didn't deflect either. That alone felt seismic. I walked back inside before she could ruin it with something polite. The storm didn't crash. It didn't thunder. It didn't explode. It just shifted the air so completely. No one could deny the change. The difference wasn't loud. It was subtle, a rebalancing, like when a tide pulls back just far enough to show what was buried underneath. After Julian's speech, the gala resumed as if everything were the same. But it wasn't. Not really. People who hadn't acknowledged me all evening now found excuses to bump into me. Ava, I've heard such great things about your agency. Did I see you listed on that Forbes piece about brand disruptors? You two make such a striking pair, power couple vibes. I smiled through them all. Soft, controlled. The kind of smile you wear when you finally realize you don't owe anyone explanation anymore. Julian slipped into conversations like water, never forcing, always fluid. A couple of uncles asked for his thoughts on market trends. A donor friend of my father's actually asked for his card. The same man who once, at a family wedding, suggested I get serious about a fallback career, something stable. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. They were the ones shifting now, recalculating. At one point, Julian and my father stood together near the dessert table. I watched from across the room, not eavesdropping, just observing. Your talk was impressive, Dad said. Thank you, Julian replied, never smug, just steady. I didn't know Ava was involved in projects of that scale. She leads most of them, Julian said. Some of our best campaigns are hers, he asked. I still half watching Julian talk to a board member across the room. Yes, I didn't think he was real, to be honest. There it was, no dressing, no politeness, just raw confession. I met his eyes and said simply, a lot of people didn't. He opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to pivot, but I didn't give him the chance. I stepped away and walked toward Julian instead. Not because I needed to, but because I could. The energy in the ballroom had changed. Not drastically, but enough. People no longer looked through me. They looked at me, some with curiosity, some with hesitation, most with something that looked a lot like respect. But that wasn't the point. I hadn't come for respect. I hadn't come for applause. I came because for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel the need to avoid the rooms that once made me small. Julian found me again during one of the final speeches. We stood near the back, his arm resting gently along the small of my back. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Surprisingly well," I said. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but I don't. I just feel done, like something closed. He nodded. "That's the best kind of ending, quiet, certain." When the final dance began, I noticed my mother standing by the staircase, her posture unusually soft. She caught my eye and motioned toward the hallway. I followed. We stood in silence by a large mirror near the coat check. Her reflection stared back at me, older, tired, but no longer sharp around the edges. "I didn't expect him," she said. "I know. I didn't realize how serious this was." "It's not about serious," I replied. "It's about you never asking." She looked down at her hands, fidgeted with her clutch. "He's very composed." "Yes, he is. And you seem different tonight." "No, Mom. I've always been this version of me." "You just weren't ready to see her." She didn't argue. That in itself was new. Back inside, the party began to thin out. Aunt Judith hugged me a bit too long. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years asked when Julian and I were flying back. Ethan gave Julian a half handshake that lacked the smugness I expected. Even my father said goodnight with a tone that could have passed for warmth if you listened hard enough. No one apologized. No one had to. Because when people finally recognize who you are, when they can no longer deny it, they don't need to say sorry. They just stop pretending you're invisible. Later, at the hotel, I slipped off my dress, peeled the pins from my hair, and stood barefoot by the window. Julian walked up behind me, arms wrapping around my waist. "Was it worth it?" he asked quietly. I thought for a moment. "Yes," I said. "But not for them. For me. This wasn't revenge. This was release. Change doesn't always come crashing through the front door. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in email subject lines, unexpected text messages, or a pause that wasn't there before." Julian and I didn't talk much about the gala the next morning. We didn't need to. He made us coffee while I packed. I rolled my dress into a garment bag. He booked our car to the airport. It was a normal morning, except it wasn't. Not really. There was a stillness in me I hadn't felt in years, like something inside had settled. I hadn't gone to the gala to make a point, and yet a point had been made. On the drive to the airport, my phone buzzed. "Dad, saw this in Forbes. Thought you'd find it interesting. Reminds me of one of the projects you mentioned." Attached, a link to an article about luxury brand reinvention in post-COVID markets. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even a compliment, but it was something. At the terminal, Julian handed the driver a tip and pulled our suitcases out of the trunk. My phone buzzed again. Family group chat, Carter legacy a photo, Julian and I, near the gala stage, laughing over something. Caption from my mother, "Look who finally made it into the family album." I stared at it for a second too long. The image was crisp, well framed, candid. The smile on my face didn't look forced. For once, it wasn't. I didn't respond, I just saved it to my phone. Back in Paris, things moved quickly. My inbox was flooded. Our team finalized a campaign timeline for a new Scandinavian beauty brand. Julian flew to Dubai for a keynote on brand integrity. The apartment felt full again, warm with movement and meaning, but every now and then the ripple from the gala reached us. My aunt, the same one who laughed loudest about my imaginary CEO, sent me a Facebook friend request. She liked 3 of my old travel photos, one in Croatia, one in Kyoto, and one of Julian and I at a marina in Greece. Ethan texted me a few days later. "Ethan, hey, sorry if I've been a jerk." That was impressive. Really? Me? Not sure if that's an apology or a TED Talk intro. "Ethan, let's go with both." I didn't reply, but I read it twice, and I didn't delete it. A week later, I dropped by my parents' house during a short trip to California. I hadn't told them I was coming, just needed to pick up a few things Mom insisted I grab before they shipped a box and broke something expensive. Julian stayed in the car. Inside, the house smelled the same: incense, citrus cleaning spray, something baking. The family photos along the hallway had been rearranged. Some older ones swapped out. A few new frames added. I paused near the stairwell. There it was. A photo of Julian and me at the gala, framed in brushed gold, sitting between Ethan's wedding portrait and a Carter family reunion shot from 5 years ago. Did you print this? I asked when my mom came around the corner with a box of kitchenware. She looked at the photo, then at me. Your cousin emailed it. I liked it. It's a nice picture. It is. There was a long silence. She adjusted a vase on the console table, even though it didn't need adjusting. I may have misjudged, she said softly. He seems thoughtful. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was the closest we'd ever gotten. I never needed you to be impressed, I told her. I just needed you to stop assuming I was lying. She didn't argue. For once. She just nodded. You've always done things differently, she said. That's hard for us to understand. But maybe different doesn't mean wrong. That sentence, maybe different doesn't mean wrong, echoed in my chest for hours. Not because it was poetic, because it was overdue. I left before either of us could ruin the moment by saying too much. When I got back in the car, Julian glanced at me. You okay? Yeah, I said. Actually, yeah. He didn't push. That was another reason I loved him. He knew that sometimes silence is the loudest kind of peace. We flew back to Paris on a Thursday. The sun was just breaking over the clouds as the plane descended. Below us, the city shimmered, soft and gray and alive in that distinctly Parisian way, like a place that doesn't try to impress you because it already knows it doesn't need to. Home. Julian reached for my hand as we landed. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Life resumed. Meetings, deadlines, rooftop dinners, morning light through sheer curtains. But something had shifted. Not in the world, exactly. In me. It was like the air had cleared. For years, I'd tiptoed around family conversations, danced through topics, dodged questions, carried the weight of being the disappointment. Not out loud, but implied. Coded in polite phrases and birthday wishes with too many periods. Now, I didn't flinch anymore. Julian and I spoke at a global branding summit a few weeks later. He opened the first day with a keynote on innovation in emerging markets. I closed the second with a talk about personal storytelling, brand legacy, and identity across cultures. Afterward, someone from the board approached me. You're Carter's daughter, right? From the Heritage Fund? I nodded. Your father must be proud. I smiled. Not because of the compliment, but because I didn't need it anymore. A few days later, I received a handwritten note from my father. Not an email, not a text, a letter, 3 paragraphs, neat cursive, ink slightly smudged in one corner like he'd paused too long trying to decide what word to use. You've done well. I didn't see it before, but you've built something. And then, at the very end, I'm proud of you. I read it 3 times, then folded it, slipped it into my desk drawer, not because I needed it, but because sometimes closure doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with handwriting you never thought you'd see. Julian and I stood on the balcony that night, wine in hand, the city murmuring beneath us. So, he said. Now what? I exhaled. Looked at the lights. Thought about every moment that had brought me here, every silence, every sting, every scene in that ballroom I'd once dreaded walking into. Now, we just live, I said. Loudly, freely, unapologetically. You always did, he replied. Not always. He leaned in and kissed my shoulder. But now you don't have to look back. We stayed there a while. Long enough for the city to blur, for the hum to become background, for the moment to feel like more than just an evening. It felt like the start of something not bigger, but lighter. Because the best kind of ending is the one where you no longer need to prove you belong because you've already built something so solid, so real, so undeniably yours that no one can take it away. I didn't need their permission. I never had. But it was satisfying, so deeply satisfying to let them watch me win. Not loudly, but unshakably.